This happened to me, and for a long time I didn't tell anyone outside a tight circle because of how raw it felt. But if you're hearing my voice now, it's because I want the truth out where it belongs. No embellishments, no fiction, just how it really went down. Ethan clinked his glass at a corner table at the Publican in Chicago and said, clear enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, that I was too emotional to run a company. We were gathered to celebrate the soft launch of my app, and he did it with a smile so rehearsed it could have been a demo pitch. The candle between us bled wax down its stem while his friends, a small constellation of venture guys and ad tech bros, paused in their oysters and cocktails, their eyebrows cocked toward me like cameras waiting for a reaction. It was January, snow clinging to the sidewalks, and the betrayal landed like a slap that sucked the air from my lungs. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I had grown up 20 minutes west in Oak Park, the daughter of a nurse who worked night shifts at Rush and a dad who repaired HVAC systems, and I nursed improbable dreams in the shadow of the skyline, that I could build something from nothing. I made things in notebooks before I made them in code. A few years of product at a fintech in the Loop taught me how to listen to what customers didn't have the words to complain about yet. A late-night certificate class at 1871 taught me cap tables and the language of investors. The app was my first real leap, a scheduling and compliance toolkit for home health agencies that cut billing errors and paid caregivers faster. 2 pilot agencies in Bronzeville and Rogers Park had signed letters of intent. I should have been drunk on adrenaline that night. Instead, I stared into my glass at the lemon peel sinking and wondered who had switched the gravity off inside me. Babe, don't get prickly, Ethan said, laughing because the men around him were laughing. Because men like him were born knowing a room will bend for them if they push hard enough. I'm protecting you. A founder has to stay steady. I looked around the table. 2 of Ethan's colleagues from Northline Partners, his boutique growth consultancy with 3 floors in a renovated brick building on Green Street, watched me like they were studying market data. One was a guy named Chris I'd met twice. He flicked his napkin and said, "It is true that markets prefer predictability over," then aborted the sentence when he saw my face. By too emotional, Ethan meant I cried in my car the night a pilot caregiver texted that the app's alert had made her clock-in look late, and she got docked pay. I had fixed it by 2 a.m., pushed a hotfix from my couch while Lakeshore Drive glowed like a burn in the window. I meant it when I told the caregiver I was sorry. Ethan had seen the red in my eyes and decided that if I felt things, I must be a liability. I didn't say anything then, because if I opened my mouth, I would have either asked him to step outside or begged him to take it back, and both choices felt like losing. After dessert, we walked out into air that tasted like iron. Our boots sank into powdered snow. He threw an arm around me, cheerful, theatrical. "Don't be mad," he said, the words curling white. "That table is power. If they believe you're volatile, they won't invest." "What if I don't want their money?" I asked, though of course I did. I wanted anyone's money who didn't want to own my spine. "But you do." He kissed my hair. "We do." The "we" twisted something inside me. Because he'd asked me to marry him in September under the hanging bulbs at Parsons, a ring in a little velvet box and the promise of something that wasn't leverage or a deck, but a life. Because he'd said all the right things. I don't need to be the star of the show, and your thing is your thing. Because I believed him. Because I was naive enough to think that love and alignment were synonyms. A week later, over coffee at the Hoxton's lobby, I caught the first real scent of rot. An angel I'd been courting, a woman who did early-stage checks into health tech out of Wilmette, texted that she needed to pass for now after feedback from parties close to Ethan. I stared at the text until my coffee went cold. She called when I didn't reply, and in that careful voice people use when they've been coached by a lawyer, she said, I'm hearing your priorities are shifting, that you might be less committed than you appear. From who? I asked. I can't disclose that. I put my phone down and watched a couple in blinding Canada Goose jackets glide through the revolving door. It was so easy to imagine the shape of the whisper. She's engaged. She'll be distracted. She's reactive. She's fragile in the way women often are. I close my laptop because there's a mode of being efficient where you swallow your own pain like it's a vitamin. I started checking Ethan's expressions the way I checked logs. He would open his laptop on our couch, the Hudson smoke-colored with too many late nights, and smile into emails that I couldn't see. He'd say things like, "Just trying to keep everyone aligned for you," and "Do you want me to vet your deck for tone?" Little offers that felt like kindness until I remembered they were also choke points. At night, he slept like a boy who'd always had clean socks and report cards framed on walls. I slept like a contractor who knew the pipes were wrong but couldn't convince the client to open the walls. In late February, my best friend Tasha, who had a taste for disaster and a memory for who said what when, pulled a thread I hadn't thought to touch. We were in line at Mindy's Hot Chocolate for to-go churros, and she said, "Northline's lease on Green Street, that's a condo, right? They bought their floors?" "Floor and a half," I said, watching the kitchen move like a clock. "Why?" "Because a broker I know mentioned a private note sale to me last week." She shrugged, casual like a cat. "Thought of you when I heard Northline's name later. Something mezz debt, later stage line, blah blah, don't quote me." I felt heat crawl up my neck. Debt. The word had teeth. Not because I understood all the instruments, but because I knew how power flows. If Ethan's company owed money to the wrong people at the wrong time, control wasn't a permanent state. It was a lease with a short fuse. "Who's your broker?" I asked. "I'll connect you," she said, fishing a churro from the bag with a grin. "But don't be a zealot. You're emotional, remember?" I laughed, which hurt my ribs. Back at our place in River West, the wind made the windows hum. I opened my laptop, pulled up the due diligence folder I kept on my own life. Contracts, cap table models, a spreadsheet of potential angels with notes like, "Says she loves underdog stories. Watch her eyes. Wants board seat." I added a tab, Northline. I filled it with scraps. A Crane's Chicago business profile that said they'd taken on bigger clients than their headcount should allow. A mention of a strategic partnership with a fintech in Minneapolis that looked like a revenue arbitrage. A LinkedIn post about moving into the Green Street condo after a record year. More texts trickled in over the next week and a half from people I'd pitched who were now inexplicably cool. A warm intro cooled down like water left in a January garage. A career mentor from my fintech days told me a rumor had drifted through one of Ethan's dinners, that I'd built a prototype at best, and shouldn't pretend otherwise. The lie had handprints I recognized. When I asked Ethan, because there's a point where you must say your fear out loud or it swallows you, I made pasta and set it in front of him and kept my voice level. "Are you talking to people about me?" "Always," he said, twirling linguine. "How else do you think you're going to raise?" "I'm greasing wheels. By telling them I'm not ready?" He dropped the fork, offended like I'd accused him of theft. "I told them you need structure." "That's a fact. You think you can do everything alone?" "Investors like to hear you've got adult supervision. From you?" "From anyone," he said. "Don't make this about gender." The last word hung there like a dare. I took our plates to the sink because I needed the sound of water to carry me through the next minute. A day later, the broker Tasha had promised, Priya from a shop on LaSalle that dealt in commercial debt and distress, took me for coffee at Sawada. She wore her hair in a sleek bun and her blazer like armor. "Northline's mezzanine lender is shopping a note," she said without preamble. "The senior is fine. The mezz is a 28% slice, due in June. They're behind on a covenant and—" She stopped, glanced at me, recalibrated language. "And the lender doesn't want to work it out in-house. They'd like to sell the paper, haircut it, and be done." "What happens if someone buys the paper?" I asked, my mouth dry. You become the mezz lender, she said. You inherit the rights. If they default, you have leverage. If the structure allows, you can take the collateral. Sometimes that's equity. Sometimes it's equipment. Sometimes it's a headache you didn't need. And the office? I asked, thinking of the sunlit exposed brick floor on Green Street I'd toured once. The framed photographs of fake spontaneity on the walls. Ethan's glass-walled conference room where he lorded over brand decks like a duke over tax ledgers. The office is a separate condo. It's collateral on a different line, she said, then smiled because she saw the flicker in my eyes. But everything ties together for firms that like to layer debt and reputation. Who's the mezz lender? I asked, trying to keep my voice off the tremor. She told me. It was a fund I recognized. Quick to move, quicker to cut, allergic to headlines. The number she quoted as the discounted purchase price landed like a set of keys in my palm. If I squinted, the arithmetic resolved. I could do this if I if I recruited, if I lined up an SPV with a couple of the angels who'd believed in me before Ethan turned them into mirrors that reflected only his certainty. Priya, I said, hearing a version of myself I liked. If I were to buy that paper, quietly, what would the next 90 days look like? She lifted her cup, thoughtful. You would become a person Ethan needs to know but doesn't know he needs to know. You wouldn't show up until you have a trigger. A missed payment. A covenant breach. You'd study the intercreditor agreement like it's scripture. You'd be ready to step in as the adult supervision he keeps telling people you need. I walked out onto Green Street lightheaded. The sky a slab of cold pewter, and I thought, I am not going to ask anyone to hand me dignity anymore. I am going to buy the building where he practices cutting me small, and then I'm going to buy the lever he used to keep me small. I'm going to do both if I can. When I got home, Ethan was sitting on the couch with his sleeves rolled, a perfect photograph of diligence, and he smiled up at me like nothing was happening. How's my mogul? He asked. I kissed his forehead because I could perform too and went to my office. I closed the door, sat with my back against it the way I used to when I was a kid, and wanted to feel the heaviness of something that couldn't be pushed open. Then I opened my laptop and built a map. Arrows from the mezz lender to Northline, arrows from the condo to a separate lender, arrows from my angels to a clean SPV that would own the note. The spreadsheet came alive with conditional formats, red to green, cliffs and ramps, a plan hanging together because I needed it to. The next week was a blur of clean coats and lies. I placed calls from park benches in Wicker Park, from the quiet back corner at the Roby's Cafe, from a booth at Daisy's Po' Boy where a cook sang along to a song that made the air warmer. I told two angels the truth stripped of venom. Ethan had crossed a line between feedback and sabotage. They didn't need the messy details. They needed the arithmetic and the ethos. If they came in with me, we could turn a predatory whisper into a paper trail and a reckoning. The wires landed into the SPV's account on a wet Thursday when the river looked like lead. Priya called me that afternoon. Congratulations, she said in a voice that made the words sound like a door muffled closed. You own the mezz note. I set my phone on the desk. The apartment was quiet, except for sirens in the distance and the click of our heat cycling. I had expected victory to feel like a drumline. Instead, it felt like the thin, clear air of the top of a winter staircase. There was still so much to do. The intercreditor agreement read like Babylon mixed with math. I printed it, highlighted portions until they glowed, FaceTimed with a lawyer who lived in Bucktown and ate crackers during our call because we both forgot to be human when adrenaline was cheap. The agreement gave me cure rights and a timeline. It gave me a lever to demand compliance reports that lenders were owed but often too lazy to chase. It gave me a path to show up as the adult supervision Ethan liked to invoke. At dinner, Ethan told me one of his clients, a DTC cookware brand with pop-ups at the shops at North Bridge, was giving them an equity kicker for hitting a growth milestone. His cheeks were pink with winter and victory. I could buy a Vespa, he said, strictly to see me roll my eyes. Buy new socks, I said. and he grinned because I'd clapped his line back. And for a moment it was us again, uncomplicated by capital. 2 days later, I used a key of a different kind. I scanned the Northline Mesnotes compliance schedule and saw a line item for quarterly reporting on cash burn and receivables that was a week overdue. It was a small thing. But small things are how the ocean eats a pier. I sent a formal notice as the new Mes lender requesting the report within 3 business days. I wrote it like someone who had written 100 of them, which is to say, like a person whose warmth could never be confused for softness. I CC'd the senior lender per the agreement. Then I closed my laptop and stared at my reflection in the window until it stopped looking like someone who needed permission. An hour later, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard his voice threaded with performative calm. "This is Ethan Cole," he said, like I didn't share his bed, like we were 2 men in suits introduced after a panel. "I think there's been a mistake. We don't deal directly with Mes. Our contact is at—" "Hi, Ethan," I said. "There's no mistake." Silence. Then a soft, "Maya?" "We can talk in person," I said. "Monday 10 a.m., your office." He laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Is this some kind of test?" "It's the opposite," I said. "Bring your CFO." And then I hung up before he could charm me into forgiving him. Because that was his talent. Making you feel like disagreeing with him meant you had failed to see a bigger picture only he could see. I set the phone down and for the first time in months, took a normal breath. On Monday, I walked into the Green Street building in a camel coat I'd bought secondhand at luxury garage sale to celebrate a promotion I gave myself in my head. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish. The security guard buzzed me up with a smile that said I looked like someone who belonged. As the elevator rose, my heart climbed into my throat and stayed there, beating in the wrong place. Northline's glass doors opened into afternoon light and curated plants. His assistant, a woman with immaculate nails and a stack of bracelets, looked up, smiled like she didn't know she should hate me yet, and offered water. "Maya, right? He'll be a minute." I nodded, took the water, and stood where I could see everything. The long corridor lined with framed covers of magazines that had quoted Ethan. The glass conference room with a view of the street where he'd rather be photographed than think. The door to the CFO's office slightly ajar. I could see the office like a schematic. I could see how to take it apart. Ethan emerged perfect as a TV husband, palms open. "What game is this?" he asked, genuinely curious, like he'd walked into an escape room and wanted to play. "It's compliance," I said. "Let's sit." We sat in the conference room. The CFO, a man named Paul who had the air of someone whose opinions were delivered on pale paper, joined us with a laptop and a legal pad. We went through the covenant schedule like you would through a to-do list, if ignoring it could bankrupt you. Twice, Paul tried to tell me that these things are usually handled informally, and twice I pointed to sections in the agreement that said otherwise. At one point, Ethan leaned back and folded his arms. "I don't know what Tasha told you," he said, voice low and private. "But this is beneath you." "I am beneath no one," I said, and didn't recognize my own voice in the best way. When they slid the late reports across the table, I saw the line that mattered, AR aging that had slipped. A client with invoices weeks past due. A cash cushion less cushion than sigh. I didn't need this to be catastrophic. I needed it to be leverage. As I left, I lingered in the doorway, letting the door close slow enough to be awkward. I looked back at the office, at the floorboards that held his strut, at the glass that reflected his confidence back to him. This space had been his stage. I was going to own the stage lights and the circuits under his feet, and he was going to learn how quickly a spotlight turns off when you stop feeding it. I stepped into the hallway and my phone buzzed. It was Priya, her voice smooth and urgent. "There's a whisper," she said, "that the condo's lender might entertain an offer on the note, too. Different animal, different timeline. But the package could come with rights that make a landlord very persuasive." I pressed my palm against the cool painted brick and closed my eyes. Because suddenly I could see the end. The day I would hold not just the mezz paper, but the note on the condo. The day I would stand in this glass and tell him he did not work here anymore. "Send me the details," I said, opening my eyes to the hallway lit like a clean ledger. "I'm ready." And right then, while the elevator chimed and the city's winter light turned thin and hard, the conference room door behind me clicked back open, and I heard Ethan say my name in a tone that sounded like the first crack in marble, like he'd just realized the ground under him wasn't ground at all, but a bridge I had already begun to burn from both ends. I didn't tell my mother anything until the Saturday I took her to Lou Malnati's in Oak Park, because grief needs bread to absorb it. We sat under the framed baseball photos while a family next to us cut slices for a toddler who wore half his crust on his face. My mom listened the way she has always listened, like I'd invented a new organ for the body, and she was learning how to keep it alive. When I finished, she dabbed sauce from her chin and said, "You never liked losing," then smiled with a tired sort of pride. "You were 6 when you told Mrs. Reynolds you didn't want to be line leader. You wanted to be principal." "I was also 6 when I fell off the monkey bars and cried until the nurse came," I said. "You cried because it hurt," she said. "And then you went back on the bars the next day." "That's not being emotional. That's being human." The word landed like warmth where the cold had nested. I wanted to tell her everything. The secret SPV, the mezz note sitting in my inbox like a pistol with the safety on, the way Ethan's face had momentarily emptied when he realized what the letter had meant. But I also wanted to protect her from the drama. She'd seen enough strangers' ugly nights at Rush. She deserved a daughter whose life smelled like cinnamon and clean laundry. I used the big map of the next 90 days like a cutting board. I called the mezz borrower default on a minor breach after Ethan's team flubbed a deadline. Not because I wanted to drag him under, because every negotiation needs a baseline, and him believing he was in charge wasn't one. In the same week, Priya sent over the draft terms from the condo's lender, a number high enough to make me swallow, low enough to be possible if I called in favors I'd never asked anyone for. The rights package made me dizzy. With the note on the condo, I wouldn't own the space outright, not yet, but I would own the relationship that could govern his occupancy. I would be the voice that had to be answered when the fuse burned down. A line item on my spreadsheet pulsed red: money. The angels who'd backed the mezz SPV weren't the same as the property people who'd have appetite for a condo note. I needed a different tribe. I called a woman I'd met at an 1871 alumni mixer who ran a family office out of the Hancock, Sloan, with a laugh you could hear over a gala. We met at the Alice, where women who owned more than their mirrors drank tea, and I laid out the play like a heist movie where you don't kill anyone. You just take back what they stole. Sloan listened without fidgeting. When I was done, she stirred her tea and said, "You understand this makes you the villain in his story." "I've made peace with that," I said. "He started telling mine for me." She smiled with half her mouth. "Good answer." The diligence for the condo note was meaner than the mezz. Property is never just property in Chicago. It's history layered with paperwork, an alley of associations you could lose a person in. The condo association had bylaws. The lender had covenants. The building had assessments that had to be read with patience and a highlighter because people bury knives where they least expect to find them. I spent late nights on the floor with the papers spread around me, while the cat we didn't have adopted me temporarily from the hallway. I emailed a real estate lawyer who had a photo on her website of herself jogging along the lakefront at dawn, because I needed someone who understood momentum. "You realize he'll fight," the lawyer said on our first call. "He won't let go of the stage gracefully." "I'm counting on it," I said. "I need him to perform the part of himself I'm buying him out of." Ethan and I still shared a bed because logistics are slower than anger. It was like living in a set after the audience has left. We did the beats. We washed dishes. We paid ComEd. Some nights he tried to be the version of himself that had made me say yes at Parsons, the boy who kissed the top of my wrist like it was a fragile thing, and said he'd never break what he wanted to last. Other nights he came home loud with bourbon and victory, flung his tie, and told me stories about founders who couldn't count, whose projections were fantasies. He didn't talk about me unless I made him, and making him felt like shaking a Christmas snow globe for a storm it wasn't ready to have. Then I saw the email. He left his laptop open one morning because he'd run to the shower late, and I wasn't snooping until I was. The subject line was boring. Maya intro. The sender was a partner at a seed fund in River North I'd been trailing for months. The thread was long. In it, Ethan had replied to a warm intro I'd worked weeks to cultivate with this. Maya is brilliant but green. She tends to overcorrect. You'll want a co-founder who can steady the ship emotionally. He'd CC'd me on the very first email, then split the thread when he moved it private, copying in two men I'd met once at a happy hour, and that was the part that made my vision pixelate. He was running a quiet campaign to sell them a version of me that wasn't fatal, just inferior. The death by kindness. I took a screenshot because the future courts of memory are slippery. I forwarded it to my personal account and to the lawyer with a single line. Relevance TBD. Then I closed the laptop and stared at my ring, a vintage band with a Marquise diamond. We found in Logan Square that I had loved beyond sense, and imagined the stone as a mouth that wanted to say something and couldn't. That night, I cooked again because stirring is a way to pretend that the world is not about to tilt. He came home buoyant. We got a term sheet, he said, and kissed my cheek so tender my anger almost forgot its name. I'm going to turn it into a real win. You'll see. You'll be proud. I'm proud of myself, I said, too soft to be a weapon. He looked at me, finally hearing the quietest signal. Are we okay? No, I thought. But he was a man who could drown inside a minute of silence if you told him that minute was just for thinking. We will be, I said. It was both a promise and a verdict. On a slate gray Tuesday, the condo lender accepted the number Sloan and I had stitched from favors and an appetite for symmetry. The wire was scheduled for Friday. My real estate lawyer sent me a list of next steps, assignments, notices, the ritual choreography of institutions acknowledging a new monarch. I imagined the walls learning my name. I imagined the elevator recognizing my phone as a pass. The night before the wire, Ethan asked me if I wanted to escape the cold in March. Palm Springs, he said, scrolling through photos of pink hotels and bougainvillea like confetti. We could stay at the Saguaro, reset. Maybe, I said. Then, because the math of heartbreak is honest or it kills you, I added, the thing I need to reset is here. What does that mean? It means I'm not moving around the problem anymore, I said. It means you're going to hear me now. He blinked because I wasn't shouting and that confused him. I always hear you. You hear the version of me that fits your story. He stood there. For a second, I hoped he'd reach for me with the kind of apology that bends a person into a better shape. Instead, he reached for his phone. The wire landed at 9:12 a.m. on Friday. By 10:03 a.m., the assignment of the condo note was executed and recorded digitally because the future is efficient when it wants to be. At 10:45, notices went out. To Ethan, to Northline's registered agent, to the condo association and the little ecosystem of adult hall monitors who keep buildings upright. At 1 p.m., I stood on Green Street again, with the winter trying to be spring and the sun promising more than it could deliver, and buzzed the door like any visitor. When the elevator opened on the Northline floor, his assistant looked up at me with the eyes of someone who's seen a weather alert on TV, but not the storm. Maya, she said, uncertain but polite. He's with a client, I smiled. I'm his landlord's lender, I said pleasantly, because accuracy matters, and I need 10 minutes. Her bracelets clinked as she pressed the intercom. Ethan, it's your fiancé. And landlord? I mouthed, not landlord, lender. She nodded, flustered. He stepped out of the conference room looking like a man interrupted during a speech. The client behind him, a brand director with a haircut like an arrow, watched us both with the interest of someone who loved gossip but knew money better. "What is this?" Ethan asked. I raised the envelope in my hand. "Notices," I said. "Assignments. Going forward, your condo note is serviced by me. And as your mezz lender, we should sit down and talk about the covenant breaches you keep calling misunderstandings." He laughed first, because laughter had always been his first offense. Except this time it stuttered. You're kidding. You taught me to be steady," I said. I listened. He looked at his client, at his assistant, at me. He gestured toward the conference room like we could move the scene into a quieter corner of the world. But I stayed where I was because a stage is a stage because of where it is, not because of who you invite onto it. "We can do this anywhere," I said. "But we're doing it." He took the envelope. His hands were steady, but his eyes were doing the math of a man who'd assumed no one could afford to tell him no. He opened it, flicked through the pages, stopped at the signature blocks. When he saw the names, he went a little gray. "Sit," I said almost gently. "It's time you realized I'm done asking you to say you believe in me." He didn't move. Not immediately. Power had been a room he thought he owned. I had just switched off the lights. What I didn't expect, what no part of me had written contingencies for, was the door behind me opening quietly, and Paul, the CFO, stepping out with a folder hugged to his chest like a child carries a book. He looked at me, at Ethan, at the client, and said, voice careful, "I think we should show her the thing, Ethan." "What thing?" Ethan snapped, like he had 1,000 times at junior staff when a number surprised him. Paul's mouth pinched into a chapped line. "The payroll line," I turned. Ethan didn't. And for the second time in a week, I felt the ground under me thin. Felt the story I thought I was telling peel back to reveal the one I was actually in. And all I could think was, if the payroll is off, then the people at the edges are the ones who bleed first. The caregivers who depended on my app knew that math too well, and if Ethan had turned his mismanagement into their cost. I stepped past him into the conference room and put my hand on the glass table like it was the hood of a car right before the engine dies. "Show me," I said. "Show me now." Paul laid a sheet on the glass like he was setting down a mirror. "We front payroll for 2 clients," he said, voice low. "They reimburse within 3 days, except someone's been using that float." "Someone," I repeated, though we all knew the name in the room. Ethan's jaw worked like it had gum in it. "It's a liquidity bridge." "It's theft if payroll doesn't clear," I said. "And if it doesn't clear, people miss rent." Paul swallowed. "We cleared last week by pulling down the corporate line and moving expenses. But the hole is widening." I felt heat climb the back of my neck, the kind that comes when you realize a person you loved treats other people's lives like line items. My app existed because a caregiver once told me she'd pawned her wedding band to cover a paycheck gap that wasn't her fault. If Ethan had floated his image on someone else's hours? "Pull the GL for the last quarter," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. "All vendors over 10 grand. Especially anything that smells like marketing. And I'm invoking lender audit rights to get read-only access to your treasury platform. Today." Ethan flexed a smile that looked like a hurt dog's snarl. "You don't have that authority." I tapped the notice again, section highlighted in yellow. "I do." He looked at the glass, at the street below, anywhere but me. The brand director slipped out quietly because the weather alert had turned into a tornado warning, and nobody wants to be on a call when the roof peels back. Paul slid the laptop toward me. I took his chair. The numbers told a story so clear it felt like bad television. A consulting vendor named Cole Creative LLC forwarding tens of thousands a month to an account that matched the last 4 digits of a personal Amex I recognized from dinners. Vendor invoices for thought leadership assets and executive positioning that read like copy from an agency pitch deck. A reconciliation lag on the payroll float that stretched from 3 days to 9 to 13. Nothing catastrophic yet. But one bad week from headlines. And one bad morning from a nurse skipping lunch because her deposit hit late. I didn't look up when I said it. Paul, listen carefully. Effective immediately, you cease all payments to Cole Creative. You clear payroll on schedule this Friday. You circulate to me by 5 p.m. a full vendor list, and you authorize a third-party forensic review of the last 2 quarters. If you get pushback, forward it. I'll handle it. Ethan's palm hit the glass table, a clean, hard slap that made the water cups jump. This is my company. Until you pay what you owe, I said, so softly it made both men flinch. It's our problem. He took a step closer, which used to work on me. The proximity, the familiar cologne, the way he dropped his voice like we were co-conspirators. You're going to blow this up to teach me a lesson? You're going to destroy jobs? I'm trying to keep people paid, I said. You're the one who decided your image needed a payroll? Float. He said nothing because there was nothing to say that. Didn't confess the truth we could all smell. Moved fast because speed is a kind of mercy. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the audit firm I liked for their silence and their spines had a scope letter. By the time I reached the corner, Priya had connected with my lawyer about cross-default language that tied the mezz to the condo note. The words forensic, independent manager, and receivership were threaded through an email like a string through pearls. By the time I reached the river, Sloan texted, "If you need to free up extra capacity to steady payroll and move the float back in its box, our family office can paper a short-term facility with terms that make you look like a hero, and him like a child." You in? I replied with one word. Yes. At home, I didn't take off my coat. I forwarded Sarah, the lawyer who jogged at dawn, the screenshot of Ethan's email about me being brilliant but green. Pattern of interference, I wrote. Potential leverage? She called within 5 minutes. It's not criminal, she said. But it's a story a judge will understand when I ask for an independent manager to be appointed over any entity pledged as collateral under the mezz note. And if the pledge is in the mezz agreement, and I suspect it is, we can run a UCC Article 9 sale of the membership interests. You credit bid your debt. You take control. Then you decide if you want to keep him, bench him, or burn him down. You don't have to sound so cheerful, I said. And she laughed because justice makes some people giddy. We filed notices the next morning that slid into inboxes with the hard little clack of inevitability. To confirm, Sarah wrote, Mezz lender has elected its rights to approve any payments above $10,000 while the event of default is uncured. Further, Mezz lender requires immediate appointment of an independent manager to co-approve cash disbursements. Legalese, calm and clean as snow. By noon, Ethan called, breath hot with performative outrage. I'm bringing in my counsel. You're overstating everything. You're overreacting. I'm steady, I said, and hung up because I had learned when to end a loop before I got tangled. The next week became a new kind of busy. I didn't cry. I didn't buy ice cream. I learned the names of all 27 faces in Northline's payroll because if I was going to force the company into a new shape, I needed to know who would be bruised by the mold. I visited the office twice and watched them work through glass, the way a kid watches fish, a creative director with a real eye and a mortgage, an ops lead named Lila who kept 6 Slack channels moving like a subway, Paul, whose carefulness came from understanding that numbers are how you protect the people who trust you, a junior analyst who wore thrifted suits and Googled how to tie a tie before reviews. I asked Lila to coffee at Good Ambler, a half-mile from the office. Over a plate of pastry shards, she told me what I already suspected. The float had become habit. He calls it a timing fix, she said, watching my face. But timing has become a cliff we're always stepping just short of. Do you want to stay if this changes? I asked. If he isn't the one calling the shots? She breathed out. I want to work for adults. We set a date for the secured party sale like a wedding you pick because the venue is free that day. Notices went out again. A public auction in a conference room at our lawyer's firm on LaSalle Street, in accordance with Article 9. Bidders welcome. Collateral: 100% of the membership interest in Northline Holdings, LLC, subject to the senior lender's rights. Sarah's paralegal called Kroll to list it, because this needed to be commercial and reasonable, not a backroom trick. We crossed our T's so hard they dented the paper. Ethan's counsel sent a rage letter that rhymed with every rage letter I've ever heard summarized. Oppressive. Bad faith. She's weaponizing lender rights. We answered with exhibits. Cash flow statements, covenant schedules, the Cole creative invoices with their adjectives shining like mistake lamps. We included one more exhibit for texture. The email where he told investors I needed a co-founder to steady my emotions. A judge is still a human. Humans hate hypocrisy. He showed up at my door once with that old posture that women are taught is safety. A man you know leaning against the frame. Please, he said. He looked tired. Don't do this way. You're asking me to care more about your face than those deposits, I said. The answer is no. That night I took off my ring and put it in its velvet box. It looked smaller than the day he gave it to me. Not because it had shrunk, but because it wasn't a symbol anymore. It was a thing. I wrote an email with the subject line, logistics, and told him I'd leave it with the doorman. The morning of the sale, the city wore a lake effect mood. Low clouds, wind that smelled like a freezer. Sarah and I rode the elevator up with a man in a bear's scarf who asked if the firm was on 28 or 30 and then said, break a leg, because you can't help trying to be kind to strangers in elevators. In the conference room, a handful of bidders gathered, rivals with smirks, a PE associate pretending not to be 24, a woman I recognized as a turnaround expert whose eyes telegraphed, hire me, not the men. On one side of the wall, we had printed copies of the mezz note, the intercreditor agreement, the notice of sale. On the other, a summary packet, revenue trends, client rosters, blinded, number of employees, professional, boring, real. Ethan arrived late with a jaw set so tight you could have opened bottles with it. He wore the tie I'd bought him the week he'd pitched a CPG client and come home breathless. This is theater, he said, too softly to be quoted, then took a seat in the back like someone attending the final performance of a show he once headlined. The auctioneer, a lawyer with reading glasses and a voice built for disclaimers, opened the sale at a number that made one of the bidders lift an eyebrow. Two hands rose. We countered. They countered. Sarah put her hand on my wrist once, light. A reminder. Don't overpay yourself when you can credit bid. I nodded like a soldier learning to breathe underwater. At 76% of the mezz balance, the rivals thinned because they were here to say they'd tried, not to own a mess. At 90%, it was just me and the turnaround woman, who gave me a small nod that said, if you want this, take it. I'll see you after, maybe we'll work together. I credit bid the balance with fees. The auctioneer said, going once, and the room tightened, energy wheeling toward conclusion. Going twice. And I looked at Ethan and saw, not a villain, not a monster, just a man whose certainty had finally met a wall. Sold, the auctioneer said. His gavel didn't crack so much as exhale. Paperwork is the opposite of drama, and exactly what justice relies on. We signed, we countersigned. We initialed. By noon, I had a certificate in a leather folder that said, I owned the membership interests of the company, where Ethan had learned to talk louder than the room. We called the senior lender. They called back with relief disguised as caution. We'll work with you, the banker said. We like borrowers who send numbers before we ask. We walked to the daily center because Sarah said there's a kind of righteousness in climbing those wide steps when you've done something clean. We stamped and filed the last forms. We asked for a hearing the following week to substitute manager authority. No need for a receiver if the new owner has a spine and a plan. We walked back into the wind with cheeks stung and eyes watering and named it the weather. That afternoon, with the ink still drying, I took the elevator to Green Street with an envelope and a plan that wasn't vengeance so much as hygiene. Paul met me in the lobby. His eyes were tired but alert. A man who'd slept on numbers and woken up to find the math didn't change overnight. Lila stood beside him with a key card she turned over in her palm like a coin. "Operations is ready," she said. And behind her I could see, through the glass, the staff clustered in uncertain pairs, the way dogs stand near the fence when they hear thunder and can't tell if it's far. Ethan waited by the conference room, tie loosened, hands in pockets, casual, intentional, like he wanted a photograph of this thing to put under a headline later, "Betrayed but brave." "Before you make a speech," I said, "we're going to take care of the important announces first." I opened the envelope and placed 2 letters on the table. One was addressed to employees of Northline, the other to Ethan Cole. I handed the first to Lila. "Would you please read that aloud?" She nodded, voice steady. "Effective immediately, Northline is under new ownership. All employees will remain employed. All payroll will clear as scheduled. Your deposits will be funded by noon Friday, not Cobb, until further notice. Vendor review is underway. No one will be asked to work unpaid. Any overtime policies will be honored and reviewed at the end of this month. Our priority is stability. Your health insurance remains intact. Questions may be directed to HR or directly to me. Maya Patel, managing member." Heads lifted. A breath went through the office you could feel in your ribs. Relief is a sound. I turned to Ethan and slid him the second letter. He didn't touch it, so I read it for him. "Effective immediately, you are removed as Chief Executive Officer of Northline Holdings, LLC, and all subsidiaries for cause, including but not limited to breach of fiduciary duty, failure to maintain required lender compliance, and interference with a pending financing by making materially misleading statements to prospective investors. You are relieved of all management authority. Your access credentials have been disabled. Pursuant to the condo lender's rights, and with the building's cooperation, your key card will be deactivated at close of business. You may collect personal items under supervision. You will receive a separate notice concerning any severance, which is currently expected to be 0. He blinked like I'd thrown cold water. He reached for the calm voice that got him into rooms. "You don't want to do it like this." "I want to do it exactly like this," I said. "In the glass box where you told a table full of men I was too emotional to run anything." "Please," he said, and for a second the man I had loved flickered in his eyes, naked and scared. "Can we talk privately?" "You've been talking privately about me for months," I said. "This part is public." He glanced at the staff. None of them were smirking. Some of them looked away because pity is generous when you've shared break rooms. Lila folded her arms, not unkind, just certain. Paul cleared his throat, then spoke the smallest kindness you can offer a person at the end of a job: logistics. "If you give me your laptop, I'll escort you to your office for your personal things." Ethan stared at me like he wanted to argue the definition of personal. Then he laughed without humor. "You bought the building to do this." "I bought the debt that owned the building," I said, "and the equity that owns the company. Both were available because you kept telling yourself there would be a later where you'd fix it and a woman who would wait." He set the laptop down. He pulled a photo from his office, a framed shot of him and his father at Navy Pier when he was 12. The Ferris wheel behind them like a halo, and a notebook with a leather cover I'd given him the night we moved in together. He didn't reach for the awards. He didn't reach for the magazine covers. He didn't look at me when he walked to the door. At the threshold, he paused. The office was quiet except for the hum of vents and the soft tap of someone's mouse. He turned, mouth working like a sentence was being built and dismantled at the same time. "You win," he said. "No," I said. "I work." He left. Lila exhaled. Someone at a far desk wiped their eyes because stability is an emotion too. Paul looked at me like he was seeing the outline of a person he'd suspected but never met. "What now?" "Now," I said, "we do the unglamorous part. We unwind the float. We pay what's owed. We call clients and tell them grown-ups are in charge. We fold the sham vendor. We rebuild your cash nobly boring. And we write down a policy that says we never, ever build our stories on other people's rent money. I spent the next 4 hours doing exactly that. We stacked vendor lists like pancakes and ate them one by one. We called the 2 clients who'd trusted Northline to front payroll and told them how their money would be restored to its rightful lane. They didn't need to know the former CEO had been playing magician with the cups. They needed to hear a voice that sounded like a desk with drawer organizers. We called the senior lender and walked through our plan. I emailed the employees from my new address and told them I didn't need loyalty. I needed candor, and that if they had receipts, now was the time to put them on the table. Then, when the floor had shifted from a deck at sea to concrete, I texted Tasha, "At Green Street if you want to see a ghost." She arrived with coffee and a laugh that rattled glass. She stood in the doorway of the conference room, took in the lights, the faces, the new quiet, and said, "It's brighter. It's the same bulbs," I said, and she grinned because she knew what I meant. At 5:23 p.m., when the office emptied to the elevators and the good quiet of a day honestly worked set in, I did the thing the title of this story promised. I rolled my chair into the center of the glass box, opened a new doc, and added a position to the org chart. CEO, vacant. Interim CEO, me. I copied the termination letter into the digital file archive. I sent a clean, simple press note to our client list, and to a reporter at Cranes I trusted. Northline announces leadership transition to focus on client delivery and compliance. No gloating. No adjectives. Just punctuation that didn't shake. I stood and looked at the skyline through the glass he'd loved because it reflected him back at himself. It reflected me now. I ran my finger along the conference table's edge. The wood was warm from a day of hands and plans. I walked out into the corridor and into the corner room, my corner now, and opened the window just enough to let in winter. I dialed my mom. "I did it," I said. "I know," she said. I could feel it. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I sat in the chair and used my too emotional heart to decide which of Ethan's clients we'd keep and which we'd send to competitors with a polite note, because revenge isn't just the firing. It's the refusal to be what he hoped I'd be after. Loud, distracted, a cautionary tale. You don't get to be a cautionary tale if you turn the lights on and keep them on. The next morning, I carried a potted plant from my apartment, snake plant, indestructible, and set it by the glass, then called the locksmith the building preferred to schedule a legal rekey of the condo door hardware. Not petty, prudent. While I waited, I rolled a whiteboard into an empty alcove and wrote 4 words in black marker. Steady is a choice. Lila added, boring is a superpower. We left it up like a prayer. When I finally took a breath big enough to hit the bottom of my lungs, I opened my own app on my phone, thumbed through the admin panel, and pushed the update I'd been testing in the background for weeks, an alert that flagged float anomalies and told admin if payroll was at risk of slipping across a weekend. It was a small thing, but small things are how you rebuild a peer. People asked me later, reporters, friends of friends, men who wanted a lesson, how it felt to fire my ex. They wanted the adrenaline shot of the conference room, the letter, the moment security badges deactivated. They wanted the soap opera because it airs at a time when people need noise. I told them the truth that never makes a headline. It felt like the calm that lives on the far side of panic when you plan well and execute better. It felt like sitting at my kitchen table in Oak Park as a kid while my mom did the math of our week on a napkin and realizing that the way she survived wasn't hard or glamorous or a lesson in domination. It was a ritual of care. 2 weeks later, the condo lender, delighted by my obsession with calendars and compliance, sent their standard default notice to the old owner and accepted a deed in lieu to a single-purpose entity we formed. We repapered the lease on terms that didn't end in fantasy. The building manager shook my hand in the lobby and said, "Good to have an owner who answers email." I moved 2 desks from my apartment to the back corner of the floor and put my app's name on a door in vinyl letters. It was a small name for a small company that was going to be big without ruining anyone to get there. I saw Ethan once more. He stood across the street that first Friday, hands in pockets, watching staff trickle out with backpacks and winter hats, talking, laughing, the relief of checks hitting like weather changing. He raised a hand when he saw me in the window. I didn't raise mine back. Not because I was cruel. Because the story had ended for him where it needed to end. And if you're lucky in this world, you get to watch your endings arrive and decide who you want to be on the other side. That night I stayed late. The office empty, except for the hum of the vents and the white noise machine we'd kept by the receptionist's desk, because people take calls they don't want heard. I turned off lights one by one and stood for a second in the half-dark of the glass box. My reflection was there, but smaller than the room. I waited. I thought of the publican's little candle bleeding wax while he said I was too emotional. And I thought of the caregivers who would be paid on time this week without knowing my name. And I thought of my mother's napkins and the Ferris wheel photo tucked under Ethan's arm. I listened to the quiet until the quiet was mine. I stepped into the corridor, keys warm in my palm, and I locked the door to the office I had bought out from under a man who mistook my compassion for fragility. Then I whispered it into the empty hall, so softly that only the building could hear. The one line I'd earned the right to say, "You were wrong about me." The end.